The fatal mistake. The horn sounds retreat. Your captain is screaming at you to hold the line, but the man beside you is already running. Then another, then 10 more. Your legs make the decision before your brain catches up, and suddenly you're sprinting through mud that grabs at your boots like hands reaching from hell itself. You've just made the worst mistake of your life. Because here's what no one tells you about medieval warfare. The battle was never the dangerous part. The fighting? That kills maybe 5 to 10% of the men on the field. The arrows, the swords, the initial clash of armies. That's almost survivable if you keep your head down and your shield up. It's the next 4 minutes that kill everyone else. In 1461, at the Battle of Towton, the bloodiest day in English history, 28,000 men died. But here's the part that should terrify you. Contemporary chronicles tell us that most of those men were killed with wounds to the back of their heads, to their shoulders from behind, to the backs of their legs. They weren't killed fighting. They were killed running. And the thing that's going to haunt you about what I'm about to show you is this. There were exactly 4 moments, 4 specific, identifiable decision points in those 4 minutes after the retreat began, where a man could survive. Miss even one of those moments, make one wrong move in the chaos, and you were already dead. You just didn't know it yet. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Let me show you why running was a death sentence, and I'm going to do it with math that medieval soldiers didn't have, but their killers understood instinctively. Minute 1, the gap closes. You're wearing 40 pounds of gear, gambesons soaked with sweat, chainmail, a helmet you can barely see out of. You've been fighting for 3 hours. Your legs are already shaking from exhaustion. You can run, maybe, 8 miles per hour, for about 90 seconds before your body starts shutting down. The cavalry behind you, they're on fresh horses. They haven't fought at all. They've been waiting for this moment. And a war horse at a controlled pursuit pace covers ground at 25 miles per hour. Do the math. You get a 200-yard head start when the line breaks. At the speed differential of 17 miles per hour, that head start disappears in 41 seconds. 41 seconds. That's how long you have before the first lance goes through the first man's back. The first decision point, crowd or space. Here's where the first survivors separate from the dead. When that horn sounds, every instinct in your body screams. Run with the group. Safety in numbers. That instinct kills you. Because the cavalry doesn't attack a scattered mob, they attack density. They ride to where the men are packed together, where a single charge can hit 8 men instead of 1. The survivors, the tiny percentage who made it, were the men who had the presence of mind to angle away from the crowd in the first 30 seconds. Not straight back, not with the mass. At a 45-degree angle toward terrain the horses couldn't navigate easily. But that requires you to think clearly while men are screaming, while your best friend just took an arrow to the neck, while every fiber of your being is yelling, run, run, run. Most men couldn't do it. Most men are already dead by minute 2. The killing technique. Let me describe exactly how a cavalry pursuit kills fleeing infantry, because understanding the mechanics makes it so much worse. The rider doesn't swing wildly. He doesn't charge through at full gallop and hope for the best. He trots alongside you, close enough that you can hear the horse breathing, and he picks his spot. The lance comes down at a 45-degree angle into the gap between your shoulder blades, angled to slide between the ribs and into the lung. Or he aims for the back of your thigh, the hamstring cut that drops you instantly and leaves you conscious on the ground for what comes next. You never see it coming. The helmet that protected you from frontal sword strikes has now become a blindfold. The peripheral vision is gone. The sound of battle behind you is so loud you can't isolate the hoofbeats of the one horse that's about to kill you. The archaeological evidence from Towton shows this with brutal clarity. Skeleton after skeleton with the same wound pattern, blade entry from behind and above, cutting downward through the back of the skull or the cervical spine. They were running. They never saw it. And in most cases, they were dead before they hit the ground. The funnel. You've made it past the first wave of cavalry. Maybe you angled away from the crowd. Maybe you just got lucky. You're still running. And now the terrain is about to kill you instead. The second decision point, the river choice. At Towton, the Cockbeck River was 400 yards from where the line broke. Every man who ran was running toward it because it represented escape. Get across the water, and maybe the cavalry stops pursuing. But when you reach that riverbank, You're faced with a choice that has to be made in less than 3 seconds. Option A. Plunge in with the thousands of other men who got there at the same time. The current is fast. The water is freezing. Men are already going under. But it's forward. Option B. Run parallel to the river, looking for a better crossing point. This keeps you on the cavalry side of the water for another 60 seconds. But it might give you a crossing you can actually survive. The men who chose option A mostly drowned. The chronicles describe the Cockbeck running red with blood for 2 miles downstream. Bodies stacked so thick at the main crossing point that men behind them tried to use the corpses as a bridge. The men who chose option B, the ones who ran along the bank looking for a ford, a fallen tree, anything, gave themselves maybe a 20% survival rate instead of 5%. But again, you have 3 seconds to make that choice while men are screaming, while the water in front of you is churning with drowning soldiers, while the hoofbeats behind you are getting louder. The bridge at Stirling, 1297. Let me show you how bad the terrain trap can get. At the Battle of Stirling Bridge, the English army was retreating across a narrow bridge, the only crossing point over the River Forth. The bridge could hold maybe 10 men walking abreast. 15,000 men tried to cross it at the same time. The Scottish forces didn't even have to fight. They just held the far end of the bridge and killed every single man who made it across, one by one, while the men behind them kept pushing forward onto a bridge that was already carpeted with bodies. The pressure from behind was so intense that men were pushed off the sides of the bridge into the river. They sank immediately in full armor. The drowning alone killed thousands. The survivors, and there were very few, were the men who had the discipline to turn around, fight their way back through their own panicked army, and find another way across the river miles upstream. Think about what that required. Turn your back on the only visible escape route. Fight against the tide of your own side. Gamble that there's a ford somewhere else that you might reach before the cavalry catches you. Almost no one could do it. Betrayal from all sides. You've made it past the cavalry's first pass. You've navigated the river. You're still alive. You're still running. And now your own side is about to kill you. The third decision point, camp or countryside. When an army retreats, there's one place that seems like sanctuary, your own camp. Your fortifications, your supplies, the place you slept last night. Every instinct says, get back to camp, you'll be safe there. That instinct is a trap, because fortress gates designed to keep enemies out work just as well at keeping panicked mobs in. At Towton, thousands of Lancastrian soldiers ran back toward their camp at Tadcaster. The gates were closed. The garrison inside had already heard the battle was lost and decided their best chance of survival was to lock the gates and surrender to the winners later. The men outside screamed and pounded on the wood. The cavalry caught them pressed against their own gates and killed them there. The survivors were the men who understood the camp is a trap. Instead, they scattered into the countryside, into the woods, into terrain where they could disappear. But that required abandoning the psychological comfort of the known, of structure, of the idea that your own army would protect you. The peasant threat. Here's something most people don't think about. When you're a fleeing soldier in enemy territory, the peasants are just as dangerous as the cavalry. Because for the last 6 months, your army has been foraging, which is a polite word for stealing food from every village you march through. You've been taking grain, livestock, and occasionally burning buildings when the locals resisted. The peasants remember, and when they see you stumbling through their fields, alone, exhausted, wounded, wearing armor you can barely move in, you're not a soldier anymore. You're a slow-moving target wearing your life, savings, and metal. At Agincourt in 1415, French peasants hunted down wounded French nobles from their own side after the battle and killed them for their armor. The armor was worth more than 3 years of farming income. A wounded man couldn't stop them from taking it. You might survive the cavalry. You might survive the river. And then a farmer with a wood axe finds you sleeping in his barn, and that's where your story ends. No glory, no songs, just a shallow grave and a turnip field. The mind breaks. Let's talk about what happens inside your head during these 4 minutes, because the psychological dimension is what makes survival nearly impossible. You're not making rational decisions anymore. The part of your brain that does planning, that weighs options, that thinks about consequences, it's been overridden by pure survival instinct. You're operating on the same level as a deer being chased by wolves. And here's the cruel irony. The men who survive are the ones who can think clearly when everyone else is panicking. The fourth decision point: stop or keep running. This is the one that separates the tiny handful of survivors from everyone else. At some point in the pursuit, usually around the 3.5-minute mark, there's a moment when the cavalry has passed you by. They've moved on to chase the men who are still running in a group, because that's easier kills. If you're isolated, if you've angled away from the crowd, if you've made it to difficult terrain, there's a moment when the immediate threat moves past you. And in that moment, every instinct in your body says, keep running, get as far away as possible. The survivors stopped. They found a ditch, a thicket, a depression in the ground. They got down. They stayed down. They let the pursuit move past them. Then, after the cavalry had moved on, after the sounds of screaming had faded into the distance, they moved again, slowly, carefully, avoiding roads, staying in cover. But stopping when you're terrified requires an almost superhuman level of self-control. It requires you to override the panic, to bet your life on your ability to read the tactical situation correctly. Most men couldn't do it. They kept running until their legs gave out, and the cavalry came back for a second pass and found them. The guilt that kills. Here's something the chronicles mention that's almost worse than the physical danger. The guilt. You're running past wounded men from your own unit. Men you've known for months. Men who are begging you to help them, to carry them, to not leave them behind. And you keep running, because stopping means dying. The men who survived the retreat at Towton, the ones whose names appear in records years later, often showed signs of what we now call PTSD. They left their villages. They couldn't settle. Some became hermits, because they had saved their own lives by running past their friends. And they had to live with that for the next 40 years. Now here's what's going to change how you think about all of this. I've spent the last 14 minutes telling you how impossible it was to survive a medieval retreat. And it was. The survival rate for common infantry in a full rout was somewhere between 5 to 15%. But there's one group of people on that battlefield whose survival rate was over 80%. The nobles. Because while you, the common soldier, were running on foot, exhausted, in 40 pounds of gear, the nobles were on horseback. Fresh horses, fast horses, and the enemy cavalry avoided them. Why? Because a captured noble was worth a ransom that could equal 10 years of a common soldier's income. You kill a peasant, you capture a knight. So the light cavalry would specifically ride past armored nobles to chase down common infantry. The nobles would often escape, regroup, and be fighting in a different battle 6 months later. The economic value of your life determined whether you were prey or prize. At Towton, the Lancastrian army lost an estimated 20,000 men. The Lancastrian nobility? They lost maybe 30. Because the men making the strategic decisions, the men who ordered the common soldiers to hold the line while they repositioned, the men who gave the orders that led to the retreat in the first place. Those men had an escape plan built into the system. You didn't. The archaeological evidence. Let me bring this back to the bones one more time, because this is where the story stops being abstract. In 1996, archaeologists found that mass grave at Towton. Skeleton after skeleton, buried without ceremony, without markers. The forensic analysis showed. Bullet operator 70% of fatal wounds were to the back of the body. Bullet operator most victims showed signs of healed injuries from previous battles. These were veterans, not raw recruits. Bullet operator the killing blows were efficient, professional, practiced. Bullet operator many showed signs of malnutrition and disease even before the battle. These were men who had survived multiple battles. They weren't cowards. They weren't incompetent. They had made it through the fighting at Towton, hours of brutal hand-to-hand combat. And they died running because the system they served was designed to treat them as expendable. So here's what you need to understand about medieval warfare, and about the retreat, and about all of this. The most dangerous thing you could do on a medieval battlefield wasn't charging into combat. It was believing you were safe when you turned around. The fighting was structured. It was organized. You had your unit, your position, your role. The line held, or it didn't. But at least you were facing the threat. The retreat was chaos. And in chaos, with everyone making individual survival decisions, the mathematics worked against you. The cavalry was faster. The terrain was against you. Your own exhaustion was against you. And the system itself, the medieval social order that put you on that field in the first place, was designed to protect the valuable and discard the common. Those 4 minutes after the horn sounded retreat killed more men than all the arrows, all the swords, all the cavalry charges of the actual battle combined. And the cruelest part? The men who survived weren't necessarily the bravest or the strongest. They were the ones who made 4 correct split-second decisions while their brains were flooded with terror. They were the ones who could think when thinking should have been impossible. They were the lucky ones. Final thought, the names we'll never know. In the historical record from Towton, we know the names of maybe 40 people who fought there. Nobles, mostly. A few knights. The commanders. The 28,000 dead. Their numbers. Statistics. Archaeological specimens in a museum case labeled Towton 25 or Skeleton 41. They had names. They had families. They had reasons for being there that probably made sense at the time. And when the retreat began, when the line broke, when those 4 fatal minutes started counting down, none of that mattered anymore. They ran, like you would have, like anyone would have, and they died doing it.